Hello everyone. Welcome to the Cleaning Overgrown 99 YouTube channel. Today, let's follow this group of young people as they completely clean up this abandoned war school and uncover the truth behind it. This will be a video that takes you from one surprise to another. Let's get started together. Every time they thought about their old school, a strange, indescribable feeling filled their hearts. It was not just a place where they had learned, it was also a symbol of a period in history that had seen its fair share of struggles. The school had witnessed many battles for independence, and it was not only a place where dreams and futures were nurtured, but also a living testament to the resilience that led to their hard-won freedom. Today, 5 young people walked back into the old school, but it was nothing like the vivid images in their memories. Once a lively place full of hope, it had now fallen into ruin. Wild grass grew everywhere, and the old walls were covered in thick green moss. Broken bricks scattered the ground, and the once majestic trees they had sat under now stood as wild, overgrown giants, blocking every path. In front of the school, they stood silently. No words were spoken, only the heavy sound of their footsteps. Their eyes reflected a mixture of sorrow and resolve. They knew that today's task was not just to clean up a neglected school, but to revive a piece of history to ensure that the legacy of the past would never be forgotten, and that future generations would know that this was once a battleground for their independence. They began, each instinctively taking on different tasks. One carried a grass cutter, another grabbed a machete and a pickaxe, while others took shovels and a wheelbarrow to haul dirt. The sound of the grass cutter whirred to life, followed by the chopping of branches, the buzz of saws, and the clattering of spades. Each action was accompanied by a flood of memories and emotions that came rushing back, stirring up feelings long buried. The school was no longer a place of learning, but a forgotten, neglected land. Yet with every movement they made, the place slowly began to come back to life. The wild grass was cut down, the trees blocking the paths were chopped down, and the faces of these young people, eager and determined, became a symbol of resilience of their bond to the past, the present, and the future. "Do you remember the last time we did this?" One of them spoke up, pulling at the pickaxe and glancing at the patches of grass that had already been cleared. "Of course. That was during the summer, and the sun was so hot. But none of us complained. We just kept working until it was dark. We thought that once we finished clearing, the school would come back to its former glory. But who knew?" His voice trailed off, a pause hanging in the air. As the group let memories flood back, the others didn't respond, but their eyes seemed to wander toward distant thoughts, to a time long past. A time when the school had witnessed both triumph and tragedy. As the grass cutter hummed away, long, wild blades of grass were trimmed, revealing the dry, red earth underneath. Each cut of the machine seemed to erase a layer of time, exposing the marks of a forgotten era, and beneath that overgrowth, they all knew that the stories of those who fought for freedom here still lingered hidden, yet present, deep within the soil. Standing in the middle of the schoolyard, one of them looked up at the old walls that had once stood witness to many battles, many struggles. "Do you ever think about how many lives this school has seen? How many destinies have been shaped here?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Definitely. This school wasn't just a place of education, it was where the hopes of many generations were sown," another one answered, their eyes sweeping over the faded bricks. "Today, we're not just cleaning, we're protecting a piece of history." The word history seemed to drive them further, spurring them on with an invisible force. There was no rush, no sense of exhaustion, just the deep belief that what they were doing mattered. They couldn't let this school fall to ruin. They couldn't allow the memories, the stories of those who came before, to be forgotten. Even the chill of early autumn could not dampen their determination. They worked tirelessly, one task after another, rolling up the old carpets of grass, cutting down branches that blocked their way, scooping sand from the ground with their shovels. Every task, every movement, felt like they were fighting a quiet, unseen battle against time, against the creeping effects of decay and neglect. And in the midst of the saws, the pickaxes, and the grass cutters, they began to understand something they hadn't fully realized before. This school was not just a place for learning. It was a living testament to the dreams, the hopes, and the struggles of everyone who had passed through its gates. When the work was nearly finished, one of them looked up at the sky, where the sun was beginning to break through the clouds. "Today is a special day," he said, "because what we've done is more than just cleaning up an old school. We've given it back a piece of its life. And now, future generations will inherit this legacy." Their eyes all turned toward the school, where, one day, new students would walk in carrying with them fresh dreams and hopes, just as the previous generations had. This school would continue to be a part of their lives, a place where new aspirations were born, where new futures were shaped. The air grew warmer as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the now much cleared courtyard. The group took a moment to rest, gathering by a nearby tree that had once been the site of many afternoon breaks during their school days. They sat in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The school, though far from restored, looked less abandoned, now more alive, even if just for a brief moment. "Do you think it's still the same inside?" one of them asked, his voice quiet, almost as if he were speaking to himself rather than anyone else. His question hung in the air, weighted with nostalgia and uncertainty. "I don't know," another replied, shifting uncomfortably as if the idea of entering the school felt like a step into the unknown. "I remember the classrooms, the walls covered in posters and drawings, but now, I don't even know if I can picture it clearly." It was strange how memories could be so vivid, yet so fleeting at the same time. They had all spent so many years here, learning, laughing, arguing, and dreaming. And now, as they stood outside its crumbling walls, it felt as though those memories were slipping through their fingers like sand. Was it possible to recapture the feeling of that time? Could they truly restore the school to its former glory, or was it already too late, faded beyond recognition? Despite the uncertainty, the group knew they had to go inside. They couldn't leave without seeing the interior, without confronting the ghosts of the past. One by one, they stood and began walking toward the entrance, the once grand wooden doors now hanging loosely on their hinges. The hinges creaked with each step, as though the building itself were reluctant to let them in. The dust from the abandoned hallways swirled in the air, coating everything in a fine layer of time. The scent of aged wood and stale air filled their lungs as they stepped inside. The walls, once painted in bright colors, were now cracked and peeling, revealing layers of history beneath. Desks lay scattered across the floor, some overturned, others broken. It was as if the school had been frozen in time, frozen the moment it had been abandoned. "I remember sitting here," one of them said, standing by a row of empty desks. The teacher's desk was right there, at the front. "We'd be so nervous, waiting for the bell to ring, always hoping for a day off." Another one laughed softly. "I used to be terrified of the principal's office. Remember the smell of his cigar, how you could smell it even when he was in the room." A quiet chuckle echoed through the room, but it quickly faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. The echoes of their voices seemed to reverberate against the walls, bouncing off the memories that lingered in the dust. But as they continued to explore, the feeling of nostalgia began to shift into something heavier. It was as if the building was holding onto more than just the memories of school days. It was holding onto the very spirit of the people who had fought here. The memories of the struggles, the fights for independence, and the resilience of those who had stood in this very space. It was as though the school had witnessed the hopes, the fears, and the sacrifices of a generation that would never be forgotten. The walls, now stripped of their vibrant colors, still seemed to carry traces of the past, faint imprints of messages that had been written in chalk, worn away by time. The murals on the walls, once filled with bright images of young children and proud symbols of their history, had faded into ghostly shapes. But even in their faded state, the images were still powerful. "I don't think it's just us who are here," another voice broke the silence. "There's something else, something lingering." Everyone fell quiet. They all had felt it. An eerie presence that seemed to hover in the air, almost as if the school itself had a memory, a soul that clung to its walls. It was the kind of feeling that one could only describe as being haunted, not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by the weight of everything the school had witnessed over the years. The laughter of children, the determination of their parents, and the many struggles they had endured together. One of them stepped forward, placing his hand on the wall. "It's strange," he said softly. "This place is falling apart. But at the same time, it feels like it's still holding on." They all stood still for a moment, taking in the enormity of what they had just experienced. The school was no longer just a building. It had become something more, an enduring symbol of a community's resilience. A witness to the generations that had passed through its doors, each carrying with them a piece of the past. And then, as though on cue, a breeze swept through the open window, sending a chill through the room. It was a sign, a reminder that they were not just here to clean up the physical space. They were here to restore the spirit of the school, to breathe life back into the memories that had once made it so full of energy and promise. "I think we need to keep going," one of them said. "We can't stop now." With newfound resolve, they turned away from the haunting stillness of the school's interior and returned to the courtyard. The work had only just begun. The building might be old, the walls crumbling, but they had learned something vital in this moment. This school had not yet given up. And neither would they. As the afternoon sun cast its golden light across the yard, they picked up their tools once more. It was time to press forward, to honor the legacy of the past by continuing the work that had begun long before they had ever set foot here. As the day stretched on, the group worked with renewed energy. The school still stood, though weary and battered. But they were no longer just clearing debris and cutting back the overgrowth. They were beginning to understand the magnitude of the task before them, not just the physical labor, but the emotional and historical weight the place carried. This was no ordinary school, no ordinary task. The tools they used were worn, much like the school itself. The engines of the machine sputtered with age, and the handles of the pickaxes had been smoothed down from years of use. But their determination kept them moving forward, each cut, each shove of dirt, a tribute to something greater than themselves. They had decided to tackle the school building room by room, starting with the most neglected areas, the classrooms on the upper floors. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the air grew thick with dust as they ascended. But when they reached the first classroom, the sight that greeted them stunned them into silence. The chalkboard, which they had expected to be nothing more than a forgotten relic, was still there, its surface cracked and faded but still legible. Faint remnants of writing and drawings from years ago clung to the dark surface. The names of students long gone were scrawled across the board, fading with time but still unmistakable. And beneath the board, old wooden desks stood in rows, some still upright, others tilted or broken, but each one a relic of the past. "This is where it all started," one of them whispered. His voice was thick with emotion as his fingers brushed against the desks, each one a piece of history. "Right here, where the dreams of so many were shaped." They stood in awe for a moment, as if giving the room its due reverence. But it didn't last long. The dust was settling in their throats, the air growing thick with the weight of memories. They couldn't afford to stand still. They had a job to do. Moving methodically, they began clearing the room, hauling out broken furniture and old materials that had been abandoned. The farther they worked into the room, the more they uncovered old textbooks that were falling apart, papers scattered across the floor, remnants of a time when learning was still an active part of the school. Each discovery felt like a piece of the past slipping through their fingers, impossible to hold on to. But it wasn't just the artifacts that struck them. It was the feeling of the place there, the walls, the silence that hung in every corner. It felt as though the room itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to bring it back to life, something to restore the spark that had once filled it. Another classroom was no different. The desks were still there, but there was something haunting about them, something that made the group uneasy. The sense of abandonment was overpowering, and yet they couldn't help but feel a sense of connection to those who had sat in these very seats, who had learned, laughed, and lived here. The sense of history was palpable. "Do you ever wonder," one of them asked, "what it must have been like to sit in these seats when the school was thriving, when everything was different? It must have been full of energy." Another answered, a far-off look in their eyes. "We were just kids then, not fully understanding the significance of what was happening around us. But those who came before us, those who fought for this school, understood. They knew that this place was more than just a school. It was a symbol of hope. The word hope lingered in the air like a prayer. Hope for a better future. Hope for freedom. Hope for a community that could overcome its struggles. And as they continued their work, they realized something profound. This school had been a beacon of hope for so many, even in its darkest hours. It had endured, even when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Suddenly, one of them paused, his eyes falling on a small corner of the room. In the dust, barely visible, was a framed photo. It was tucked into the corner behind a shelf. As though it had been forgotten long ago, with trembling hands, he reached for it, carefully lifting the frame out of its hiding place. The photo was old, its edges yellowed with time, but the image it captured was unmistakable. A group of men and women, their faces strong and determined, stood together in front of the school. They were dressed in the clothes of a different era, their postures proud, their eyes filled with conviction. It was clear that this photo had been taken during a time of struggle, a time when the fight for independence was at its peak. "We've been working so hard to restore this place," the one who found the photo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we're not the first ones to put everything into this school. These people, they gave everything, their hopes, their dreams, their lives." The group gathered around the photo, each of them reflecting on the faces in the image. They didn't recognize them, not by name, but their presence was undeniable. These were the people who had built this school, who had fought for its survival, and their struggle had become a part of the school's very fabric. For a long time, they stood there, in that classroom, with the photo between them. It was a moment of silence, a moment of reflection. The past had collided with the present, and it felt as though the ghosts of those who had come before them were watching, waiting for them to do justice to the legacy they had left behind. "This school doesn't just belong to us," one of them finally said. "It belongs to everyone who fought for it, to everyone who believed in it. We're just the latest chapter in its story." The realization hung in the air, like the dust that still lingered in every corner of the room. The school was not just a building, it was a living testament to the past, to the people who had struggled and sacrificed to make it what it was. And as they carefully placed the photo back where it belonged, they knew that they had a responsibility not just to restore the building, but to honor the history it represented. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on their shoulders, but it was one they were ready to bear. They left the classroom that day with a new sense of purpose. The work ahead of them would not be easy, and there would be many more challenges to face. But they were no longer just 5 young people clearing debris. They were the torchbearers of a legacy of resilience, hope, and sacrifice. The evening sky began to darken, painting the horizon in shades of orange and pink as the group continued their work. There was no rush now. The urgency that had once fueled them seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a quiet resolve, a sense of duty. They were no longer just clearing out the old. The building was still in need of repair, but the real work, the most meaningful part, had already begun. It was about the spirit of the place. It was about creating a bridge between the past and the future. They had been at it for hours, each swing of the pickaxe, each push of the wheelbarrow, bringing them closer to their goal. Yet, as the sun sank below the horizon, the moon began to rise, casting a silvery light across the school grounds. The feeling of the school, once so heavy with the ghosts of history, now seemed to shimmer with something new. Hope, yes, but also a sense of continuity. There had been moments when it felt like their efforts were futile. The building was old, the damage extensive. Would anyone even notice their work once it was finished? Would the next generation appreciate the depth of the history that had shaped this place? But as they worked, their thoughts began to shift. The more they cleared, the more they could imagine what the school might look like in the future. Children running through the halls once more, teachers in front of chalkboards, they were full of laughter and life. It was a powerful vision, one that kept them going, even when the work seemed endless. At one point, they stopped to take a break by the old playground, which was now little more than rusted swings and broken structures. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and one of them, sitting on the ground, looked up at the stars. "Can you imagine," they asked softly, "what it would be like to come back here years from now and see kids running around, playing games in the playground again? It would feel like we did something that mattered," another one replied. There was a deep quiet in their voice, as though the simple act of imagining the future had given them a new sense of purpose. The group sat together for a moment, their eyes tracing the shapes of the stars, wondering if their efforts would ever be remembered in the way the sacrifices of those who fought for this land had been. They could never replicate what had been done before them, they could never go back in time. But what they could do was build upon that history, adding their own chapter to the story of this place. The future of the school, of this community, would depend on them and those who would come after. You know, one of them said, breaking the silence, we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for the kids who will come here one day, for the ones who will sit in these classrooms, who will learn and dream. We're setting the stage for their future. The others nodded, the weight of those words sinking in. They weren't just restoring the building, they were building a foundation for future generations to stand on. Every stroke of the brush, every brick they placed, every inch of the land they reclaimed, was a piece of that future. They weren't just working on stone and wood, they were shaping lives. The thought was humbling, overwhelming in its importance, but it wasn't just about rebuilding the physical space. It was about restoring the sense of hope that had been instilled in this place long ago. The school had not been a mere structure. It had been a symbol, a beacon of possibility for those who had fought and sacrificed for the land. Now, it was their turn to breathe life back into it. It was their turn to ensure that the spirit of the school lived on, not just in the walls, but in the hearts of the community. The next morning, the group arrived early, ready to continue the work. They had spent hours discussing their vision for the school's future, and now, it was time to put those ideas into action. The old classrooms that had once felt suffocating and distant were now filled with potential. They began by painting the walls, not in the dull colors of the past, but in bright, welcoming shades, colors that would inspire creativity and imagination in the children who would one day fill these rooms. The energy between them was different now. It wasn't just the physical labor that kept them moving, it was the emotional connection they had formed with the place, with its history, and with the future they were working to create. They had begun to see the school not as a relic of a bygone era, but as a living, breathing entity that had the power to shape lives for years to come. Imagine the first day the new students walk in, one of them said, as he placed the final coat of paint on a classroom door. What will they feel when they step into these rooms, knowing that people fought to keep this place alive? Knowing that this is where their future begins, I think they'll feel proud, another one replied. Proud of what this place stands for. Proud of the history that's been preserved here. They all stood back and looked at their work, their faces lit by the soft glow of the morning sun. The classrooms were transformed, bright and full of possibility. The walls no longer felt heavy with neglect, they felt filled with energy, with purpose. But there was still so much to be done. The playground still needed repairs, and the exterior of the building needed a fresh coat of paint. There were steps to be taken before the school could be fully restored, and the work would continue long after they had finished their part. But for now, standing in those classrooms, looking at the changes they had made, they felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. True, lasting hope. As the day wore on, they worked tirelessly, but with an ease that only comes from knowing they were doing something that mattered. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were ready to build it together. They had the strength, the vision, and the resolve to see it through. The past had shaped them, the present had inspired them, and now they were creating a future that would carry the legacy of this school and the hopes of generations forward. Days turned into weeks, and the group continued their work at the school, each day bringing them closer to their goal. The building was transforming slowly, but surely. The walls were no longer gray and crumbling. They now wore fresh coats of paint in bright, cheerful colors. The classrooms, once abandoned and filled with dust, were now alive with the sounds of tools and laughter. The playground, though still in need of repair, began to show signs of new life, with fresh grass beginning to sprout in patches where it had once been overrun with weeds. Yet, as much as the building had changed, it was the community's involvement that truly began to breathe life back into the school. It wasn't just the 5 of them working anymore. Other locals, some of whom had gone to this very school years ago, had come to help. The youth, inspired by the idea of reviving a place with such a rich history, had gathered to assist with the work. It was as if a collective spirit had taken over, as though the school had become more than just a physical structure. It had become a symbol of the community's resilience and shared dreams. One evening, as the group worked to place new benches in the courtyard, one of the locals, an elderly man who had been one of the original students of the school, stopped by to offer his help. He had heard about the restoration and had come to see the progress. As he approached, the group paused, sensing that his presence was more than just a casual visit. "Do you mind if I lend a hand?" the elderly man asked, his voice gruff but filled with a warmth that only time could bring. "Of course not," one of them replied, smiling. "We'd love the help." The elderly man began to work alongside them, his hands slow but steady. As they worked together, the group couldn't help but notice how his eyes would often wander to the building, as though searching for something that only he could see. After a while, one of the younger members of the group asked him, "What's on your mind? You seem a little lost in thought." The man paused, his hand resting on a wooden bench as he looked up at the school. "I'm just thinking," he said quietly. "Thinking about how this place has been part of our lives for so long. My generation learned here. Our parents fought for this school. But now it's in your hands. You are the ones who will carry it forward. This school, this land, it all belongs to you now." His words hung in the air, and the weight of them settled heavily on the group. This was not just about restoring bricks and mortar, it was about something far deeper. They were becoming stewards of a legacy that spanned generations, and the responsibility was not one they took lightly. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that their efforts were part of a larger tapestry, a tapestry woven by the countless hands that had come before them. "That's a heavy thought," one of them said quietly, wiping sweat from his brow, "but I think we're ready for it. We've been working so hard. And now I feel like this school is more than just a place to us. It's a part of who we are." The elderly man smiled softly. "That's exactly it. The school isn't just a building, it's the heart of the community. And as long as it stands, it will keep beating. But you need to remember, it's not just about keeping the walls intact. It's about carrying on the spirit of what it represents. The struggles, the sacrifices, the hope, it all lives here." With that, he turned and began to work alongside them once more, his hands now more nimble, as if the work had rekindled something inside him. Later that day, as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, the group took a moment to step back and admire what they had accomplished. The school, though still far from finished, now felt like a living thing. The classrooms glowed with new life. The courtyard was filled with benches where people could sit and reflect, and the playground, though still under repair, had become a place of anticipation of the laughter and joy that would once again fill it. But it wasn't just the physical changes that had transformed the school, it was the spirit of the place. The memories of those who had walked through its halls, the history that had been preserved, and the community that had come together to restore it had made all the difference. The school no longer felt like a relic of the past, it felt like a bridge to the future, a living testament to what could be achieved when people worked together with a common purpose. The group gathered in the courtyard, looking around at their work. They were tired, their muscles aching, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the air. They had done something extraordinary. They had brought this place back to life, not just with their hands, but with their hearts. "I think we're almost there," one of them said, looking at the school with a sense of pride. "We've done more than just restore the building. We've revived the heart of this place." "Yeah," another replied, gazing up at the walls, which now stood tall and proud. "And now it's time for the next generation to carry it forward, to make it their own." The elderly man, who had been quietly watching them, nodded in agreement. "That's right. You've done something beautiful here. And when the next group of kids walks in, they'll carry that same pride, that same strength. They'll build on what you've done." For the first time, the group truly understood what their work had meant, not just for themselves, but for the future. The legacy of this school was no longer something that belonged solely to the past. It was a living, breathing thing, and now they had passed the torch to the next generation. As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the courtyard, they stood together, a silent promise in their hearts. They had restored the school, but in doing so, they had also restored their connection to one another, to their community, and to the history that had shaped them all. The final stretch of work was a blur of activity: sanding, painting, sweeping, planting. The school was almost unrecognizable from the dilapidated, overgrown shell it had been when the group had first arrived. The walls were solid again, vibrant and colorful. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the courtyard had been transformed into a welcoming space where the community could gather. The playground, once a forgotten ruin, was now a place where children could run and play, where laughter would soon fill the air once more. But the most powerful transformation had happened within the group themselves. They had come here as young people, eager to reconnect with their past, with their memories of the school, but they had left as something else entirely. They had become the caretakers of a legacy, not just of a building, but of a community and a history that was much larger than they had ever imagined. It was on the final day of their work that the true depth of what they had achieved hit them. The last coat of paint was drying on the main building, the final touches were being added to the new benches in the courtyard, and the last weeds were being pulled from the flower beds. As the group stood together, admiring the fruits of their labor, the elderly man who had joined them earlier that week returned. He was not alone this time. He had brought others with him, families, teachers, old alumni, and even some of the younger children from the neighborhood. "This is amazing," one of the newcomers said as they walked into the courtyard, eyes wide with admiration. "I can't believe how much has changed. It's like a dream." The elderly man stood silently for a moment, watching the group's reactions. Then, turning to the young team who had led the restoration effort, he spoke softly. "I told you this school was more than just bricks and mortar. This place was built on the dreams of many generations. You've made those dreams live again." His words settled in the air, a soft reverence filling the space. The group of young people exchanged glances, some of them trying to hold back tears. They had done more than restore a building, they had revived the essence of the place. And as they looked around, they realized that this school, this community, was now ready to face the future. They had completed the work, but their part in the story was not over. One of the younger members of the group stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've done this together," she said, looking at the faces gathered before her. "But this school, this place is not just for us. It's for everyone who's ever been here. And it's for the kids who will come after us. It's our job to keep this alive, to make sure the next generation knows how important this place is. Not just the school, but what it represents." A round of applause broke out among the crowd, a mixture of admiration and pride. The elderly man, who had watched them grow throughout this journey, smiled. He knew the future of the school was in good hands. But it wasn't just about maintaining the building. It was about ensuring the spirit of resilience, determination, and hope continued to inspire everyone who walked through these doors. Later that afternoon, the community held a small ceremony to celebrate the reopening of the school. The air was filled with the voices of children, parents, and teachers, those who had once been students here and those who would soon be. The local leaders spoke of the importance of this school, not just as a place of education, but as a symbol of freedom, community, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As the ceremony drew to a close, the elderly man stood up again, walking to the front with the help of a cane. He cleared his throat and looked around at the gathered crowd, his eyes twinkling with pride. "You see, this school has always been more than just a building," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "It's been the beating heart of this community. It has seen us through our struggles, our triumphs, and our hopes. Today, you've all given it a new life. But remember, this school belongs to everyone. It's not just for the students, not just for the teachers, it's for every single one of us who has walked through these doors. It's for the families who fought for its survival, and for the generations who will come after us." He paused, his gaze resting on the young group that had led the restoration. "You've honored that legacy," he said, "but the true test will be what you do next. You're the ones who will carry this place forward, and I have no doubt that you will." The group stood there, their hearts swelling with pride. They had done it. They had brought the school back from the brink of decay. And now, It was alive again, not just as a physical space, but as a living, breathing part of the community. The sound of children laughing echoed through the courtyard, the sound of new beginnings. The sun had set, but the glow of the school, now fully restored, still bathed the area in warmth. It was a symbol of the past, the present, and the future, a bridge between generations. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could still bloom. And as the group looked around at the faces of the community, old and young alike, they knew that their work was far from finished. They had breathed life back into the school, but it was the people who would continue to nurture it. It was up to them to ensure that the lessons of the past, the sacrifices of those who had fought for independence, and the spirit of resilience that had brought this school to life would never be forgotten. This was just the beginning. This video is not just about restoring an old school, but also conveys profound messages about the connection between the past, present, and future. The school is not just a physical structure. It is the historical legacy of the community, a place that bears witness to the struggles and sacrifices of previous generations. Restoring it is an act of preserving memories and important cultural values, honoring the past, and laying the foundation for future generations. Through this, the video emphasizes the power of love and community spirit, where every individual can contribute to building a stronger society when united and working together. Additionally, it highlights that each generation has a responsibility to carry on the legacy, not only to preserve what has been built but also to prepare for a brighter future. Hope and belief never fade, and the small actions we take today are stepping stones for a transformed future. Finally, the video underscores the value of pride and responsibility. We must not only take pride in what we have but also protect and develop these values to pass them on to future generations. From this, the video inspires us all to realize that no matter how difficult or challenging the path may be, with faith, unity, and action, all good things are possible. Thank you all for watching until the end of this video. Please remember to like and subscribe to support us. It's a huge motivation for us to create even more engaging videos in the future. Once again, thank you, and I wish you and your family good health. Goodbye. And we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming videos. Goodbye.